So our story is on the events leading up to, and most importantly, the prayer right before they started creating the United States Constitution. So in quick summary, this was following the British surrender in 1787, and the colonies were freed, but they needed to draft a constitution because the Articles of the Confederacy they just didn't. So the delegates, they quarreled and disagreed on everything pertaining to the new government, except that George Washington was going to be at the head of it. They just had a lot of disagreement, and then Benjamin Franklin stood up and quoted Psalm 127, verse 1, which says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it." And he was just calling upon more reliance on God for direction in what they were trying to do. And a couple days later, they reconvened. They had a reverend open up their session with prayer. And he basically prayed about that using that same Bible verse, and then they closed with the Lord's Prayer. And then immediately after is when they started getting the Constitution written. So.
All right, so I'm going to highlight how the story reflects Christian influence. And so the story mentions that whenever they first started talking, there was a lot of arguing. No one was really getting along, and they weren't getting anywhere. And then, like Grayson mentioned, Benjamin Franklin stood up, drew the crowd to him, and basically quoted Psalm 127:1, which says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain." And so basically he took a moment to stop what they were doing and reflect and focus on the Lord. And so the Christian influence there is no matter what you're trying to accomplish, and obviously what they're trying to accomplish here is a very good thing, creating the United States and getting a constitution to govern it by. Unless the Lord builds the house, it's in vain. So even if the pursuit is in itself good, if the Lord isn't building the house, it's in vain. And we know, like in John 10:10, it mentions that Jesus gives life to the full. And so even like I mentioned, even if it is good, if you want it completely to the full, even if they weren't arguing and they were getting along really well, if you want what's best for your country, for your nation, for your life, you need to seek what God has and what the Lord has for it. And then I think Benjamin Franklin stopping them for a second and turning their eyes to the Lord. We know in Psalm 25:9 says that guides the humble in what is right and teaches them his way. And so the Christian influence there is whenever they stop and humble themselves and see they're getting nowhere on their own, but they need the Lord's influence in it, then the Lord will honor that and guide them in the way they need to go.
Okay, so I'm talking about the 3 consistent truths from this story. And I think it's very interesting. It's not highlighted very often how divided our country was, especially at this time. I think that's something we really are resonating with, specifically right now in this moment. Our country is broken. It's a human system. Our founders were human, and we're all broken and human and sinful. And it's only through the grace of God, even from the very beginning, that our country was able to protect human liberty and freedom like it has. And it's only through God that it's sustainable. And so I think that's a great reminder for us now. It's really only through the grace of God that our country has become what it is, and we need him every day in our current atmosphere to continue to be able to build on that. And then similar to what Ryan was saying, it's very interesting that Ben Franklin had to remind the delegates of God's faithfulness in their history, and I think that's what we're doing right now, which is awesome, something we need to do more. And they're coming out of the American Revolution, which was a really difficult time, immediate battles, it's hard to fight, it's stressful. And Ben Franklin reminds them, he said, "In the beginning of the contest with Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayers in this room for the divine protection." So it's really easy in times of trial, I think, for all of us to plead with God. And it's really easy to know our own weakness in times of trial. And when the dust settles a little bit, it's a lot easier to get comfortable and not rely on God as intensely or as urgently. But that's when we need him even more. And our nation was built on recognizing that God's providence and protection is vital to moving forward, even in times of prosperity. And we need him all the time. And then our third truth is that prayer was what jump-started the unity of the Continental Congress, and that still endures today. So without prayer, without setting aside time, as Ryan and Gray mentioned, the Constitution was not able to be written. So you had to make that set aside time to ask the Lord to move hearts and to bring people together. And I think that's true in our own lives. I think it's true on a governmental level today. Asking God for his wisdom enables us as flawed people to move past our differences and unify together and produce something that glorifies him. And without that, we are not able to do that. So that's our presentation.